The alley behind Dawson's bookstore had the kind of silence that felt unnatural, a damp, forgotten place where time had settled in dust and rust. The scent of old paper and mildew mixed with the cold bite of the autumn air and the dim glow of a flickering street lamp cast uneasy shadows against the cracked brick walls. Then I heard them, tiny, desperate cries, thin as whispers but sharp as needles. I followed the sound, heart pounding, until I saw them, 4 fragile kittens, curled into each other, their tiny bodies trembling, eyes still sealed shut, abandoned, exposed, and fading fast. A wave of panic surged through me. Was I too late? The sight of them, 4 tiny lives clinging to existence in the freezing air, sent a jolt through my chest. Their fur was damp and matted, their frail bodies barely moving except for the shallow rise and fall of their bellies. They shouldn't have been here, out in the open like this. No mother, no warmth, no chance of survival. I dropped to my knees, my breath visible in the cold air. What do I do? My hands trembled as I reached out, afraid I might hurt them just by touching them. They were weightless, no heavier than a handful of crumpled leaves. I tucked them into my jacket, one by one, feeling their tiny claws press against the fabric as they squirmed weakly. Mia's number was already dialed before I even realized it. The second she picked up, I blurted, "I found kittens." Newborns, no mother. A brief silence, then her voice turned sharp. "Nathan, you need to get them warm. Right now. No delays." I ran, through the alley, across the rain-damp pavement, past the glowing bookstore windows where Mrs. Dawson was sweeping up. She looked up, eyes widening, but I didn't stop. Inside my apartment, I grabbed towels, a heating pad, anything I could find. The kittens lay in a bundle, their tiny bodies barely moving. Their fragile chests rose and fell like candle flames flickering in the wind. Would they even make it through the night? The apartment was dimly lit, the soft hum of the heater filling the silence as I worked quickly, setting up a makeshift nest in a worn cardboard box lined with thick towels. The kittens lay curled together in a fragile heap, their tiny paws twitching, their ears too small to fully perk up. Their fur, still damp from the cold alley, carried the faint scent of mildew and earth, a stark contrast to the warmth I was desperately trying to surround them with. I tucked the heating pad beneath the towels, making sure the temperature wouldn't be too intense, then gently nudged their weightless bodies toward the warmth. They barely reacted, only a weak stir from one of them, a soft, breathless mew escaping another. It was impossible to tell if they were slipping away or fighting to stay. Mia arrived within minutes, her presence bringing with it a sharp efficiency, a practiced calm that should have reassured me, but only made the reality of the situation feel heavier. She didn't waste time with greetings. Instead, she knelt beside the box, running careful fingers over each kitten's frail body, checking for signs of dehydration, pressing gently at their bellies to assess if they had eaten at all before being abandoned. The look in her eyes told me what I already feared. They were on the brink, dangerously close to fading, and the next few hours would decide everything. I watched as she pulled out a small syringe filled with formula, tilting the first kitten's head ever so slightly before coaxing a single drop onto its lips. For a moment, nothing. Then, the faintest flick of a tongue, a movement so small it barely seemed real, but enough to ignite the smallest flicker of hope. The night stretched on in a haze of hushed voices and careful hands, the room bathed in the golden glow of a single lamp as we worked in quiet urgency. The kittens were so impossibly small, their fur barely concealing the fragile skeletons beneath, their ribs pressing sharply against their skin with each shallow breath. One by one, we fed them, a painstaking process of coaxing tiny droplets of formula onto their tongues, watching, waiting, hoping they would latch. Some responded faintly, weakly, but then there was Ember. She was the smallest, her body barely more than a whisper against the towel, her movements sluggish even as Mia tried to rouse her. The formula sat untouched on her lips, and when Mia gently massaged her throat, urging her to swallow, there was nothing. No reaction. No instinctual flick of her tongue. A creeping dread coiled in my chest as I watched her breathing, the rise and fall of her body growing fainter by the minute. Mia's voice was steady, but I could hear the tension beneath it. "She's hypothermic. She doesn't have the energy to eat." Without another word, she scooped Ember into her palms and tucked her against the bare skin of her collarbone. wrapping a thick blanket over both of them. Skin-to-skin warmth, our last desperate attempt to pull her back. For the first time that night, I realized the reality of what we were up against. Not all of them were guaranteed to make it. The weight of exhaustion pressed against my shoulders, but sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. The air in the apartment felt heavy, thick with the scent of warm milk and the low hum of the space heater. Ember remained tucked beneath Mia's sweater, her fragile body pressed against the warmth of human skin, her tiny heartbeat a barely perceptible flutter beneath trembling ribs. I kept my eyes locked on her, counting each breath, waiting for any sign that she was slipping away, fearing that at any moment the shallow rise and fall of her chest would stop. Elliot sat on the couch, arms crossed, his usual confidence replaced with quiet uncertainty. He had come over an hour ago, reluctant at first, but as the weight of the situation settled in, the sharp edge of his skepticism dulled. He wasn't an animal person, not like Mia or me, but even he seemed shaken by how close to the edge these kittens were. What if she doesn't pull through? His voice was careful, like saying it too loudly might make it real. Mia didn't answer immediately, her fingers barely moving as she traced slow circles across Ember's back. "Then we do what we can," she said finally, her voice soft but firm, "and we don't stop until we know there's nothing left to do." The words settled in the room like a silent vow, unspoken but understood. We weren't just watching over these kittens, we were fighting for them. The night blurred into morning, a slow creeping light filtering through the blinds as the city outside stirred awake. Inside, time felt frozen, each second stretching into something weightier, something fragile. The kittens lay nestled together, their tiny bodies pressed into the warmth of the heating pad, and though they still looked impossibly small, there was at least one small victory. 3 of them had eaten. Ember, however, remained dangerously still, her breathing a shallow whisper against Mia's collarbone. The first real complication came with the sharp buzz of my phone vibrating against the kitchen counter, its sudden intrusion jarring against the delicate stillness of the room. I barely registered the name on the screen before answering, pressing it against my ear with a quiet, tired urgency. Mrs. Dawson's voice met me on the other end, her usually warm, steady tone edged with something tense, something uncertain. "Nathan, I think the mother cat came back." The words sent a ripple of something sharp through my chest. I turned away from the others, gripping the phone tighter. "You saw her?" A pause. "Early this morning. She was looking, Nathan. She was looking for them." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. I had convinced myself the kittens had been abandoned, that their mother had left them to die. But if she had come back, if she had been searching, had I done the right thing by taking them? Had I stolen them from the only chance they had? The weight of Mrs. Dawson's words clung to me like a fog that refused to lift, thick and suffocating, seeping into my bones with a slow, creeping unease. The phone sat limply in my hand, the last echoes of her voice still ringing in my ears. I had convinced myself I was saving them, that fate had placed those kittens in my path because they had no other hope. But if she had come back, if she had been searching, then what had I done? I had stolen them. I had pulled them away from the only warmth, the only familiarity they had ever known, and now they lay helpless in a cardboard box, fragile and uncertain, their fate no clearer than before. Mia caught the shift in my posture before I even spoke, her exhausted gaze sharpening as she studied my face. "What's wrong?" I forced the words out, though they felt thick and foreign on my tongue. "The mother cat came back." A hush fell over the room, not the quiet of peace, but the heavy, suffocating weight of too many unanswered questions. Elliot sat forward, his fingers laced together, a deep line creasing his forehead. His voice was careful, deliberate, but edged with unease. "Then we have to take them back, right? If she's looking for them, she's their best chance." Mia, still cradling Ember's frail body against her skin, exhaled slowly, as if bracing herself for the argument that was about to unfold. Or she left them on purpose. Maybe they were too weak. Maybe she knew something we don't. We don't know why she left. And that was the worst part of all. We didn't know. Every decision felt like fumbling in the dark, hoping we weren't making things worse. The dilemma gnawed at me, a persistent weight pressing against my ribs as I paced the apartment, torn between logic and instinct. The kittens lay in their nest, their fragile bodies rising and falling with each shallow breath, unaware of the decision looming over them. Outside, the city stirred to life, the distant hum of traffic and the muffled voices of early risers drifting through the window. But in here, time felt suspended, stretched thin by uncertainty. Mia adjusted the blanket wrapped around Ember, her fingers brushing absently over the kitten's frail body, her face unreadable. "We can't just assume she'll take them back," she said finally, her voice even but heavy with unspoken worry. "If she rejected them once, there's no guarantee she won't again." Elliot ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the sharp exhale that followed. "And if she didn't reject them? What if she was just scared off? What if she's still out there, searching?" His words hung in the air, unanswered. I turned back to the kittens, my gaze settling on Ember. Her breathing had steadied, but she was still dangerously weak, still teetering on the edge between survival and something I didn't want to name. If we took them back and she was abandoned again, she wouldn't make it. But if we kept them and their mother had been waiting, had we just stolen their only chance? The answer wouldn't come easily. But we were running out of time to decide. The weight of indecision hung thick in the apartment, an unspoken pressure that settled into the corners of the room, lingering in every exchanged glance, every hesitant breath. The kittens, blissfully unaware of the battle waging around them, remained nestled together, their tiny bodies radiating warmth against the heated towel. Their fur, still damp from the long night of uncertainty, had begun to fluff slightly, signs that they were stabilizing, except for Ember. Her body remained limp, her breath shallow, her survival tethered to the fragile warmth Mia provided. I crouched beside the box, watching them, trying to decipher what was best. If their mother was still out there, waiting, wouldn't the right thing be to return them? Yet, the thought of setting them back into the cold, of watching Ember struggle to breathe on the unforgiving pavement, made my stomach twist. My fingers hovered over her delicate body, feeling the weak rhythm of her heartbeat against my palm, and something inside me shifted. I couldn't let her go. Mia seemed to sense my hesitation, her voice quieter now. "You're getting attached." I didn't answer immediately, but I knew she was right. I could feel it. The way my chest tightened every time Ember's breathing hitched, the way I found myself memorizing the soft patterns of their fur, the faint squeaks they made when they stirred. I had stepped into this as a rescuer, but somewhere along the way, I had started seeing them as something else, something more than just strays in need of saving. Elliot sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "So, what's the call?" The question echoed in the air, waiting. And for the first time since this started, I realized I wasn't sure I could let them go. The weight of the decision pressed against my chest, heavier with each passing second. The air in the apartment felt thick, every breath drawn slow and deliberate, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile balance we had built over the past hours. The kittens stirred slightly, their tiny limbs stretching in their sleep, oblivious to the storm of uncertainty raging around them. Ember remained still against Mia's collarbone, her fragile body warmed by skin-to-skin contact, her survival balanced on a thread that I was terrified might snap at any moment. Elliot sat at the edge of the couch, his fingers laced together, eyes flicking between us. "Look, I get it. You're attached, and I don't blame you. But if their mother is out there, doesn't she deserve the chance to take them back?" His voice wasn't unkind, but there was an edge of practicality in it, a need to see the bigger picture beyond the emotions tangled in the moment. Mia exhaled slowly, rubbing Ember's back in careful circles. "And if she doesn't? If we take them back and she rejects them again, they won't survive another night out there. Especially not Ember." Her words weren't meant to be cruel, but they landed like stones, heavy and undeniable. I swallowed hard, looking between them. The truth was, I didn't know the right answer. The thought of keeping them felt selfish, like I was playing God with lives too delicate to be manipulated. But the thought of releasing them into uncertainty, hoping a mother who had already abandoned them once would suddenly be different, felt like a gamble we couldn't afford to lose. The question wasn't just about the kittens anymore. It was about whether I was willing to trust fate or take it into my own hands. The room felt smaller now, the weight of our choices pressing in from all sides. The distant hum of traffic outside the window faded into the background, drowned beneath the sound of my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs. The kittens lay curled together, oblivious to the argument unraveling around them, their tiny chests rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic harmony. The only one still separate was Ember, her fragile body still pressed against Mia's skin, her breaths light and uncertain, as if she were balancing on the edge of existence, waiting for the final push that would decide her fate. Elliot was growing restless, shifting in his seat, his frustration seeping through the cracks in his voice. "You're not listening. You're letting emotions get in the way of what's best for them." His hands gripped the edge of his knees, his expression tight. "Their mother is out there. If we don't take them back now, we may be making this harder than it has to be." Mia shook her head, her jaw clenched. "And what if she's not coming back? What if she already made her choice? You think it's easy for a mother cat to abandon her litter? She had a reason, Elliot." Her voice was softer now, but no less firm. "And if we take them back, we risk losing all of them. Ember won't last another night. You know that." I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the length of the room. The truth was, I had already made my choice, even if I hadn't admitted it out loud. Every part of me screamed against the idea of taking them back, of setting them down in that cold alley and walking away. But if I kept them, if I interfered with what nature had set in motion, was I doing the right thing, or was I simply refusing to let go? The silence that followed was heavier than the argument itself, an unbearable stretch of uncertainty where none of us could find the right words. The weight of the choice before us settled deep into my chest, pressing against my ribs like something tangible, something suffocating. The kittens lay in their makeshift nest, their tiny bodies curled together, safe for now but fragile, so unbelievably fragile. The thought of carrying them back to that alley, setting them down in the cold, and walking away made my stomach twist. But the thought of keeping them, of taking responsibility for their survival when I had no idea if I was even capable of it, felt just as terrifying. Elliot exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. "We can't just sit here all day and go in circles. If we're taking them back, we need to do it now before she disappears for good." His voice was tight, edged with frustration, but there was something else buried beneath it: hesitation. He wanted to believe taking them back was the right answer, but even he wasn't sure anymore. Mia shifted Ember gently against her chest, her fingers ghosting over the kitten's fragile frame. "You already know what you want to do," she murmured, looking at me now, studying my expression. "You just haven't said it out loud yet." I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my mind racing. She was right. I did know. I had known from the moment I scooped them up off the pavement and felt their tiny hearts flutter against my hands. They weren't just abandoned kittens anymore. They were mine. I turned to Elliot, to Mia, to the fragile lives in my care, and I spoke the words I had been afraid to say. "We're keeping them." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew. There was no going back. The words hung in the air, solid and irreversible, like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place. The tension that had gripped the room didn't immediately fade, but there was something different now, an understanding, a quiet acceptance of the choice I had made. Elliot let out a slow breath, shaking his head slightly, but there was no fight left in him. Mia simply nodded, as if she had known all along that I wouldn't be able to let them go. The kittens, oblivious to the weight of the decision that had just shaped their futures, stirred in their nest, their tiny paws twitching, soft little sounds escaping their fragile bodies. Ember, still tucked against Mia's skin, gave a weak but steady breath, her body warmer than it had been all night. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was something. A small, delicate promise that she was still here, still fighting. Without another word, I moved. I adjusted the heating pad beneath the towels, making sure the warmth was evenly distributed. I reached for the tiny bottles of formula, double-checking that everything was in place for the next few hours. This was it. No more second-guessing, no more wondering if we had stolen them from their mother or if fate had put them in our hands for a reason. I looked up at Mia, then at Elliot. "We're going to need supplies. A lot of them." Elliot huffed a laugh, shaking his head. "I can't believe you're doing this. But there was no anger in his voice, just the ghost of something almost like admiration. Mia smiled, adjusting Ember in her hands. "Welcome to rescue, Nathan." And just like that, I wasn't just someone who had found a litter of kittens. I was their lifeline. The days that followed blurred together in a cycle of feedings, sleepless nights, and moments of quiet wonder as I watched the kittens grow stronger, their frail bodies slowly filling out, their once clumsy movements becoming more deliberate. It wasn't easy. The first few days were an uphill battle, each feeding a delicate balance between patience and desperation, each hour a silent prayer that Ember would keep fighting, that the others would continue to thrive. But then, something shifted. Their cries grew louder, no longer weak, desperate mews but bold little demands for food and warmth. Their once unsteady limbs found strength, paws stretching and kneading against the blankets. Leo was the first to open his eyes, deep blue and filled with an innocent curiosity that made my chest ache. Marigold followed, her tiny ears perking up at the sound of my voice. Even Soot, once timid and barely moving, had begun to crawl, pressing himself against his siblings for comfort. And then there was Ember, the smallest, the weakest, the one we had almost lost. But as I watched her nestled between her siblings, her tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, I realized that she was still here, still fighting. I had stepped into this as a stranger, someone who had simply stumbled upon a litter of abandoned kittens. But now, they were part of me. And as I stroked Ember's soft fur, feeling the warmth of her tiny body, I knew one thing for certain. I had saved them, but they had saved me too. Rescue isn't just about saving lives. It's about stepping into uncertainty, making choices without guarantees, and learning that sometimes the smallest creatures can change us in ways we never expected. I started this journey thinking I was just helping a few helpless kittens. But along the way I realized I wasn't just saving them. They were teaching me about resilience, about responsibility, and about the quiet, unspoken bond between humans and the animals who trust us with their survival. If you've ever thought about fostering, rescuing, or even just helping an animal in need, I encourage you to take that leap. You don't have to be an expert, you just have to care. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because the more awareness we spread, the more lives we can save. And who knows, maybe your next unexpected rescue will change your life too.